Welcome, dear friends, to another peaceful journey through history. Tonight, we step quietly into a medieval village, where stone cottages stand against the biting winter winds, and families prepare for a long, cold night. Imagine the snow drifting softly outside, the wind brushing against thatched roofs, and the faint glow of a hearth warming the home. How did peasants, with little more than straw, wool, and the warmth of their loved ones, survive freezing nights in stone houses? How did they sleep, rest, and keep the cold at bay, while the winter pressed against their doors? In this calming story, we will explore the ingenious ways medieval families created warmth, the rhythms of their nightly routines, and the subtle wisdom that carried them through long, silent nights. So, find a comfortable place, relax, and let your mind drift as we uncover the quiet art of surviving sleeping through winter in the medieval world. Before we begin, consider subscribing to the channel and joining our journey through history, one gentle story at a time. And now, let us step softly into the warmth of the past. At the end of this spoken story, relaxing, soothing music will begin to continue carrying you deeper into calm and restful serenity. The first breath of winter drifted softly across the little medieval valley, settling like a feather upon its scattered fields and thatched rooftops. Evening had already begun its gentle descent, stretching long shadows across the stone cottages that huddled together for warmth. Smoke rose in thin, wavering ribbons from every chimney, the scent of burning oak mingling with the cold, crisp air. It was the kind of night that asked for stillness, a night that wrapped the world in quiet and invited weary souls to pause, exhale, and surrender to rest. At the edge of the village, where the path dipped toward a stream, sleeping under a thin crust of ice, stood a modest stone house, typical of working peasants. Its walls were thick and irregular, cobbled together from local river stones, patched with mud and straw. Moss clung to the northern side like a winter shawl, and a small wooden shutter rattled gently whenever the wind passed by. Yet inside this humble home, warmth pulsed like a soft heartbeat. A single candle flickered near the doorway, its small flame shifting with each draft that seeped through cracks in the wood. The door itself was heavy, fashioned from season-dried planks, reinforced with iron nails that had grown cold enough to freeze to the touch. A woven cloth, faded from years of use, hung beneath it, creating a second barrier, one that the family relied on to keep the winter air from creeping too far inside. Even so, the cold found its way through. In the medieval world, winter was not a visitor to be shut out entirely. It was a constant companion that pressed its fingers against every wall, stole into every breath, and hummed quietly in every corner. Within the cottage, the hearth glowed like a serene guardian. Flames licked the logs with slow, steady motions, casting a warm amber light around the room. Shadows danced along the low-ceiling beams, making the space appear smaller, cozier, as though the house were drawing itself inward to withstand the night. Burning wood crackled with soft pop's little greetings from the fire, reassuring the family that it was alive and working dutifully. Near the hearth, a pot of thick barley stew simmered, its aroma drifting warmly through the room. A mother stirred it gently, her wool sleeves pushed to her elbows, her hands wrapped around the wooden spoon to warm her fingers. She paused every so often to hold her palms toward the fire, feeling the heat sink slowly into her skin. The children, 3 of them, sat close by, wrapped in woolen tunics that had been patched and repatched over the years. Their cheeks were rosy from the day's cold, and their breaths, still carrying faint traces of frost, softened to warm sighs as the fire thawed them. The father sat on a low stool, mending a leather strap with steady hands. The dim light of the room made every task deliberate. Nothing was hurried in the winter evenings. Labor moved gently, guided by rhythm rather than urgency. Outside, the last light of day faded behind the distant hills, turning the sky a deep indigo. A lone star shimmered above the treetops, an ancient companion to those who worked the land. Beyond the cottage walls, the village itself quieted. Chickens rustled in their coops, settling feathers against the cold. Cows shifted in their barn stalls, their heavy bodies producing enough heat to warm the wooden walls around them. Dogs curled beside doors, becoming loyal, breathing sentinels through the night. The cold thickened, turning every sound crisp, every movement measured. Inside the stone cottage, the family gathered around the hearth for their evening meal. Spoons dipped into warm stew. Wooden bowls gently clacked as they were set on the table. The children leaned close, savoring the heat rising from the food. Outside, the wind whispered along the rooftop, testing the thatch, threading between the reeds. But the fire pushed back, creating a small world of safety within the stone walls. It was in such quiet moments that stories were often told, not grand tales of kings and knights, but gentle ones, simple remembrances of past winters, small lessons woven from the land, and hopeful thoughts for the coming spring. The mother spoke softly, her voice nearly as warm as the hearth. She told the children how their grandparents had lived through winters colder than this one, how the house they sat in had protected generations with its thick stone walls and loyal fire. The father added his own stories, speaking of nights spent keeping watch over the sheep when he was younger, of freezing winds that stung his face yet made the stars appear brighter. The children listened with wide, sleepy eyes. Winter stories had a way of settling into the bones, comforting in their familiarity, soothing in their quiet wisdom. When the bowls were empty and the fire burned low, the family began their nightly preparations. Straw was fluffed in the bedding, blankets shaken to loosen the cold trapped within them. A few embers were banked beneath ash, preserving their glow so they would last until morning. The father checked the door, ensuring its latch was secure, and pushed the woven cloth more tightly against it. Outside, the village seemed to hold its breath. Snow began to fall in soft, drifting flakes so light they didn't make a sound as they touched the ground. The moon, half hidden behind clouds, cast a faint silver glow over the rooftops, turning the world into a quiet painting. Inside the cottage, warmth lingered, held close by the walls, the fire, and the presence of family. As the children's breath slowed, the parents exchanged a soft, knowing glance. Another winter night had come, and together they would endure it. Slowly, gently, the last candle was pinched out, leaving only the faint orange pulse of the hearth. Darkness wrapped itself around the room, comforting and calm. The cold pressed lightly against the stone walls, but warmth held its ground, filling the small home with a peaceful, steady presence. And so, in that quiet medieval village, beneath a winter sky and within a humble stone cottage, another night settled soft, ancient, and deeply still. Night deepened across the valley, settling more firmly over the little medieval village. The snow that had begun as a gentle drift now lay in soft, powdery blankets over the fields, smoothing the world into quiet curves of white. Every roof, path, and fence post disappeared beneath this delicate winter veil. The moon had climbed higher, its pale light glimmering on frozen surfaces like tiny stars scattered across the earth. Inside the stone cottage, warmth lingered in low, steady waves, a fragile treasure shielded from the vast cold outside. As the family slept, curled beneath wool blankets and nestled into straw-filled bedding, a question stretched softly through the still night like a curious whisper. How did they do it? How did peasants living in these simple stone houses, those modest, drafty structures, survive night after night through winters far harsher than our own? The world outside was so deeply cold that even the river seemed frozen in thought, its surface locked beneath a thin layer of glistening ice. The wind, though hushed, carried a bite sharp enough to sting the skin. And yet, within the walls of their stone homes, medieval families found their own ways to keep the cold at bay, to drift into restful slumber, and to awaken with hope for another day. The truth was not a single miracle or secret technique. Rather, it was a quiet collection of everyday wisdom, small, practical choices that together formed a shield strong enough to outlast winter's tests. Let us linger a moment inside that humble cottage, where the faint glow of ember light still pulses at the hearth. The children's breaths rise in slow mists, fading into the darkness. The parents sleep nearby, bodies turned slightly inward toward each other, sharing warmth the way countless generations before them had done. The house itself seems to breathe too, settling into the night, its stones cold but steady, its beams creaking softly as they adjust to the freezing air outside. To understand how villages survive such cold, first we must consider the very structure of the house. Though humble and uneven, the stone walls served as a silent guardian. Thick walls held more warmth than thinner ones, and once the hearth filled the interior with heat, the stones released it slowly, like a warm memory shared throughout the night. They did not glow with comfort as modern homes do, but they resisted the winter enough to grant families a chance at sleep. In many cottages, one room served as both kitchen and resting place. By condensing their living space, families trapped their warmth where they needed it most. Heat was precious and could not be wasted on empty corners or unused chambers. Low ceilings were common too. The smaller the space, the easier it was to warm. Even the smoke that curled up to the rafters left traces of heat behind, drifting through the air like a ghost of fire. Some families kept their animals in a connected stall or beneath a loft. While this might seem peculiar to us now, it was both practical and comforting. The warmth of cows, goats, or sheep rose steadily through the floorboards, lending an earthy heat to the room above. There was something reassuring in the quiet snorts and shifting hooves below life, moving through the dark, sharing its warmth without being asked. The hearth, of course, remained the heart of the home. Even after the flames burned low, embers continued to radiate a soft, persistent heat. Medieval families knew the art of banking a fire well. By covering the glowing coals with ash, they slowed their cooling, making the warmth stretch until dawn. A well-banked fire could survive the entire night, ready to be revived with fresh wood come morning. But warmth was not only in walls, and fire it was also in rituals, habits, and the closeness of family. Before sleep, families wrapped themselves in layers. Wool was the common companion of winter nights, heavy and coarse but wonderfully warm. Tunics, cloaks, stockings, and caps kept the cold from creeping beneath their blankets. The bedding itself was built from layers as well. Straw mattresses, togs simply acted as insulation, trapping pockets of warmth beneath the sleepers. On top, thick wool blankets, furs, and sometimes patched quilts created another barrier against the chill. Even sleep itself was a shared warmth. Families slept close, parents and children together, or siblings bundled side by side. Some households slept in a great bed built against the wall, a roomy platform where everyone could settle in, their combined body heat forming a natural hearth of its own. It was not just a matter of comfort. It was survival through unity. If we look around the darkened cottage now, we see evidence of all these small decisions. A heavy cloak lies folded near the beds, ready to be thrown on if the night grows too cold. A clay jar sits near the hearth, warm from earlier, filled with stones that had been heated in the fire and wrapped in cloth. Simple medieval version of the modern hot water bottle. Such warmers were tucked into bedding to ease the initial shock of cold straw. Near the shuttered window, a thick curtain hangs, woven from wool and patched with leftover scraps. It is pulled tightly across the opening, blocking the drafts that slip through the imperfect seams. Every household had these simple defenses. Straw stuffed into wall cracks, rugs laid near doors to seal the threshold, and even animal hides hung on walls like insulation. Though none of these methods could fully erase the cold, together they created enough warmth, just enough to let life continue, enough to let sleep come, enough to make winter a companion rather than an enemy. Outside, the wind sighs once more through the trees. The branches sway, shedding tiny crystals of frost that drift downward like silver dust. The fields lie beneath their snowy blanket, untouched, serene, frozen in place until morning's touch brings them back to life. The narrow village path is silent now. Even the dogs, curled by the doors, have tucked their noses into their tails to conserve heat. The medieval world, for all its hardships, knew how to blend strength with gentleness. It understood the power of small comforts, of shared spaces, of enduring together. Warmth was not abundant, but it was treasured, and in treasuring it, villagers learned how to preserve it. As the long night continues, the cottage remains a fragile island of glow within a sea of winter. The embers breathe softly, the blankets hold their quiet promise, and the people inside, tired, resilient, gently resting, survive the cold not by defeating it, but by outlasting it with wisdom, care, and the warmth of one another. And so, the mystery of medieval warmth is not a single secret at all. It is a tapestry of lived experience, woven from centuries of winter nights, just like this one. Long, cold, quiet, and filled with small, glowing acts of survival. Morning had not yet come, Yet somewhere in the deep stillness of night, a faint shift stirred within the stone cottage. Not the full waking of dawn, but the soft, instinctive rustle that happens when warmth, darkness, and quiet hold a family in their careful embrace. The hearth's embers glowed gently, a cluster of soft orange breaths pulsing beneath the ash. Their dim light revealed the tender heart of medieval life, simple, cramped, and resourceful, but filled with a warmth far richer than the winter outside. The cottage was small, no larger than a single room for most families, though many had a little loft or corner partitioned with wooden planks. Space was precious, and every inch had a purpose. Yet to step into such a home, even in the coldest months, was to feel a kind of sheltered peace, born from centuries of habit and human ingenuity. If you were to stand quietly in the center of the room just as the fire's glow rounded the walls in sleepy ember, you would notice first the way everything seemed to revolve around the hearth. It was not simply a fireplace. It was the house's anchor, the keeper of comfort, the giver of cooked meals, warmth, light, and even company. Soot marked the stones above it like old memories, and bundles of herbs hung nearby, absorbing both smoke and warmth. The floor beneath your feet would be packed earth, flattened smooth through years of living. In winter, it sometimes grew cold enough to feel like touching a stone buried in frost. But over this floor were layered woven mats, rugs, or even loose straw, anything that helped keep the cold from creeping upward into the sleeper's bones. To one side of the hearth sat a long wooden bench, its surface polished by countless hands and countless nights of sitting close to the fire. It served as seating, storage, and sometimes even as a makeshift bed when space grew tight or guests arrived. Above it hung iron hooks holding tools, spoons, a ladle, a small knife, and metal tongs for tending the fire. Every tool had its place, and nothing hung unused. In wintertime especially, nothing was wasted, not warmth, not space, not time. The family's table stood near the center of the room, roughly carved, sturdy, often wobbling slightly on the uneven ground. It acted as the household's gathering point. By day, it held bowls of porridge or wooden cups of weak ale. By night, it might be covered in wool scraps awaiting repair, or bowls of grain sorted for the next morning's meal. When winter deepened and work outside slowed, the table became the quiet workplace of the home, a place for mending, carving, weaving, or shaping dough. In the darkest corner of the room was the chest, the family's most guarded possession. Within it lay their few precious items, extra clothing, maybe a small piece of linen, the good wool cloak worn only for holy days, a cracked but carefully saved pot, and perhaps a treasured keepsake from a generation past. This chest was as much a part of the family's identity as their name. It held not just belongings, but memory, pride, and security. Near the chest, woven baskets hung from ceiling rafters or rested against the wall. Some held dried beans or onions from the last harvest, others strips of salted meat or bundles of herbs. Medieval winter survival depended on preparation, and the cottage was a living map of that preparation. Everything edible had a place and purpose. Everything movable was lifted from the floor away from pests, moisture, and cold. Even the ceiling beams were busy, hosting strings of drying herbs, garlic, or carefully saved nuts. It was a home that breathed with the seasons. Now look toward the sleeping space. In many cottages, it was simply a platform built against the wall, layered with straw and covered by blankets, scratchy, patched, heavy with the scent of wool and smoke. Some families used separate beds, others shared one long communal one. The blankets themselves were precious, often the work of a mother's hands or inherited from grandparents. Their weight was comforting, like a shield laid gently across the body. Each night, the bedding was prepared with quiet ceremony. Straw was fluffed, flattened, or replaced, depending on how it had settled. The youngest children crawled to the innermost part of the bed, safely tucked between parents or older siblings. Woolen caps were pulled over ears, cloaks added if the air felt especially sharp. The cold had no loyalty. It would pool in low corners and slip across the floor. But beneath the blankets, beneath layers of shared warmth, the family formed its own pocket of comfort, guarded by the slow, steady heat of their bodies. Even the walls played their part. Though stone absorbed the cold, villagers softened them with tapestries, dried hides, or patched cloths. Over the years, these coverings warmed the room not just physically, but emotionally. They turned a bare stone into a backdrop of lived life, decorated not with luxury, but with care. Each cloth, each piece of hung hide, told a quiet story of winter nights that had come before and winter nights that would follow. In one corner of the cottage, near the door, sat the tools of the season. A stack of wood, carefully dried and sorted by size. A small hatchet for splitting tinder. A bucket of water drawn earlier in the day, before the stream froze thick. Winter required readiness, and medieval families did not leave tasks for later. Their survival depended on Forsyton doing things when they could, not when they wished. The cottage, though simple, was a world unto itself, a place where light, warmth, and family bound together against winter's trials. And in this little world, even the quietest sound held a certain comfort: the gentle drip of melting snow near the hearth, the soft crack of a settling beam, the faint murmur of animals shifting beyond the wall. The night deepened further, and the glow of the embers dimmed to a deep, warm red. The cottage seemed to grow smaller, cozier, its boundaries defined by warmth rather than walls. In these spaces, the cold was not an intruder to be feared, but an ever-present neighbor whose presence shaped each choice, each ritual, each breath. Life inside such a home was not luxurious or easy, but it was steady, connected, and warm in the ways that mattered most. The cottage was a sanctuary because it held not just people, but the history of their endurance of countless winter nights softened by shared blankets, shared fire, and shared hope. And as the family slept on, the house continued its quiet watch, holding them in the same protective embrace it had offered 2 generations before them. In its simplicity lay its strength, in its closeness lay its warmth. Long before dawn's first glimmer touched the sleeping valley, the hearth within the stone cottage continued its ancient vigil. Even when the flames had dwindled into a bed of soft embers, the hearth remained a live, breathing warmth, guarding the family through the deep winter cold. It was more than a fireplace. It was a companion, a protector, and the silent center of medieval life. To understand how medieval peasants slept peacefully through freezing nights, one must first understand their hearth. For in every home, from the poorest hut to the humblest cottage, the hearth was the heart, not merely a source of heat, but a keeper of stories, rituals, and the quiet continuity of life. The embers glowed beneath their blanket of ash like hidden jewels, each pulse of orange light revealing the shape of the stones that framed the fireplace. These stones, darkened by years of smoke and soot, held memories of 1,000 winter nights. Their edges were rounded, smoothed by time, warmed by countless fires that had burned in the very same place, tended by hands long gone yet never forgotten. In medieval times, the hearth was sacred not in the sense of grand ceremony, but in the simple, humble way that something essential becomes holy. Without the hearth, there was no warmth, no cooked food, no boiling water, no place to dry clothes, no light to work by, no comfort in the night. It was the one part of the home that winter could not conquer. Let us step closer now, listening to the soft crackle that filters into the silence of the cottage. A faint trail of smoke curls upward, drifting lazily toward the opening in the roof, or chimney vent. In many poorer cottages, chimneys were not yet common. Instead, smoke lingered high beneath the rafters, escaping through holes in the thatch or cracks between beams. This smoky air, though irritating to modern eyes, actually brought warmth with it. It wrapped the ceiling in a blanket of its own, sealing gaps and discouraging insects. Everything, even smoke, had a purpose. A few logs lying near the hearth, pieces of wood gathered carefully during the day, chosen for their dryness and size. In winter, wood meant survival, and families guarded it with great care. Children were often sent to gather fallen branches, while parents cut and split larger logs to last the season. The father, rising from his bed in the deepest part of the night, might place one more log upon the fading embers, watching as it slowly caught flame and revived the room's warmth. It was common for medieval families to bank the fire before sleeping. With practiced hands, the mother or father arranged hot coals at the hearth's center, piled ash around them, and placed small bits of wood nearby. The ash acted like an insulating blanket, slowing the cooling. Banked properly, The fire would sleep just as the family slept but alive, steady but gentle. By morning, all that was needed was a breath of air and a few twigs, and the flames would rise again, eager to begin another day. Now imagine the cottage as the embers glow in the darkness. The light they cast is warm and soft, never harsh. Shadows flutter across the wooden beams overhead. The mother's herb sage, rosemary, yarrow hung from the rafters, rustling faintly in the occasional draft. Their dry leaves release a subtle scent each time the warm air reaches them. This mingling of smells, herbs, smoke, wool, and earth created the unforgettable fragrance of medieval winter nights. On the wall near the hearth hangs an iron pot, blackened from years of use. It swings gently, its contents having long since been eaten for supper. Yet the warmth from the fire keeps whatever remains, perhaps a little barley porridge or a stew, as last drippings from freezing overnight. Beside it sits a flat stone used for baking bread, warmed earlier in the day and now radiating a faint heat of its own. If one placed a hand on it now, they would feel the memory of warmth, held like a whispered secret. Near the hearth lie small clay jars and a wooden ladle. Some pots contain fat rendered from anamosa, vital source of calories in winter. Others hold dried peas or barley, ready to be added to the next morning's meal. To the medieval peasant, food wasn't simply nourishment, it was closely tied to fire. Without the hearth, these ingredients were only potential. With the hearth, they became sustenance. But the true magic of the hearth was found not in what it cooked or warmed, but in how it gathered people. It was the place where the family came together after long days of labor. The parents sat close, mending tools or working wool. Children nestled at their feet, listening to stories of years when winters were harsher still, or of ancestors who braved storms stronger than any they had known. Around the hearth, tales of saints and travelers mingled with common wisdom. How to read the weather from the wind, how to judge the coming frost by the sound of the river, how to survive the darkest season. When storms raged outside, the hearth became the cottage's beacon of comfort. Wind howled across the rooftops, rattling shutters and creeping through cracks, but the fire's glow pushed back the cold. Even the animals sensed this warmth. Dogs slept closer, their thick coats glowing softly in the firelight. Cats stretched along the hearthstones, purring in the deepest satisfaction one could imagine. And when the time came for sleep, the last moments around the hearth were quiet and reverent. The father would stand, stretching his stiff limbs, and check the banked embers carefully. The mother would gather any leftover warmth by placing heated stones into cloth and tucking them into the straw bed. Children often drifted into slumber while still feeling the glow of the fire on their cheeks, carried gently to bed by their parents' arms. With the fire banked and the room dim, the hearth settled into its night rhythm. The faint crackle softened into a low hum. Light faded from orange to deep red. Darkness grew thick, yet never fully cold. The hearth, even as it slept, radiated enough heat to keep the worst of the winter at bay. In this way, night after night, winter after winter, families survived. Not with abundance or wealth, but with the quiet strength of a glowing hearth, the heart that beat steadily at the center of medieval life. It was more than stone and fire. It was hope in the coldest months. It was comfort when the world grew silent. It was warmth when warmth was a precious thing. And so, when we ask how peasants endured winters in stone houses, we return again and again to this truth. The hearth kept them alive, one glowing ember at a time. The fire's glow had dimmed to a gentle pulse by nightfall, yet the cottage remained alive with warmth. Outside, the wind whispered against the stone walls, brushing icy fingers through cracks in the shutters. But inside, the family was preparing for sleep. In medieval homes, winter was not merely endured, it was planned for, anticipated, and soft with careful habits. Among the most vital of these habits were the techniques used to create a warm, restful bed in the heart of winter. The bedding in a peasant home was simple, yet remarkable in its ingenuity. Straw formed the base of the mattress, often layered thickly to create a cushion against the hard, cold earth. This straw was sometimes mixed with dried grasses or reeds, chosen for their insulating properties. Each season, fresh straw was added, fluffed, and repositioned, ensuring it remained soft and warm. The smell of the dried plants mingled with the earthy scent of the cottage, creating a familiar, comforting aroma. Above the straw lay layers of wool blankets and furs. Sheep's wool was prized not only for warmth, but for its resilience. It retained heat even when damped from the cold night air. In wealthier cottages, the furs might come from deer, fox, or rabbit, adding both softness and insulation. Even the simplest homes employed these layers thoughtfully, knowing that heat trapped beneath bedding could make the difference between comfort and suffering during a frozen night. Families often slept close together, their bodies sharing warmth in a manner that was both practical and soothing. Children nestled between parents or siblings, their small hands and feet tucked carefully beneath layers of blankets. The physical closeness allowed body heat to circulate, creating a gentle, shared warmth. There was a rhythm to this arrangement, passed down from generation to generation. The youngest at the center, the older children, and parents forming a protective outer circle, all enveloped in layers of straw, wool, and furs. For especially bitter nights, medieval families employed clever techniques to extend warmth further. Heated stones were wrapped in cloth and placed beneath blankets, radiating gentle heat for hours. Small earthen pots of embers could also be positioned near the feet, providing localized warmth without threatening the safety of the household. Even warm straw fluffed and slightly toasted by the hearth earlier in the day might be tucked under bedding to add an extra layer of comfort. These methods reflect an intimate knowledge of heat and human comfort, developed over centuries of experience. Clothing was another essential layer. Woolen tunics, socks, caps, and cloaks were worn to bed, especially on the coldest nights. While it may seem unusual to modern sensibilities, this practice allowed medieval people to retain body heat efficiently. Capes and shawls were draped over shoulders or around necks, and even mittens or simple gloves could be used during nights when the wind pressed hardest against the stone walls. Every piece of clothing doubled as insulation, working silently to keep warmth contained within the family's shared space. The preparation for sleep was a slow, deliberate ritual. First, straw was fluffed and positioned. Then layers of blankets and furs were arranged, followed by the careful placement of heated stones or warmers. Children were guided into the coziest positions, ensuring no cold corner touched their skin. Parents and older children adjusted their own blankets to form a snug perimeter. By the time the fire dimmed to embers, the bed had become a sanctuary, a small universe of warmth and security in the midst of a frozen night. As the family settled into their bedding, the cottage itself seemed to draw inward, holding in the warmth. The stone walls, thick and solid, radiated heat absorbed during the day. The low ceiling trapped warm air near the occupants, while the animals in the adjoining stall added a subtle, continuous source of heat. Even the placement of furniture and household items was intentional, designed to prevent drafts and retain as much warmth as possible. Every choice was an expression of practical intelligence, honed by generations who understood the harshness of winter. The night unfolded slowly. Breaths rose and soft, visible mists that lingered briefly in the dim air, curling and fading into the darkness. The quiet hum of the hearth's embers, mixed with the gentle sounds of the household. A soft shift of straw, the murmur of a child's sigh, the occasional creak of beams settling. Outside, the wind pressed and rattled, but the family lay cocooned in warmth, protected by both human ingenuity and the intimacy of shared space. Evening stories, soft prayers, and gentle songs often accompanied the transition to sleep. These rituals were subtle but essential, creating a sense of calm and reassurance. As eyes, closed hearts, slowed, and the world outside grew quieter. The layers of straw, wool, furs, and warm bodies formed a living shield against the cold. Medieval winter bedding was more than mere comfort. It was survival, ingenuity, and care embodied in everyday life. The family slept, but the knowledge of their methods lingered in every detail. Straw, wool, heated stones, clothing, and human warmth combined to form a microcosm of security. Each night was a gentle reminder that life in a stone cottage was not only about enduring cold, but about mastering it through careful preparation, resourcefulness, and shared love. In Tisciat measured world, the medieval peasant discovered the art of warmth, a science, as subtle as it was essential. And so, as the embers glowed faintly in the hearth, and the snow pressed against the walls, the family rested, their bodies nestled together beneath layers of straw and wool. Heated stones, tucked carefully beneath the blankets, furs and cloaks, draped over arms and shoulders. Outside, winter raged, silent yet imposing, but inside, life carried on in warmth, safety, and the quiet rhythm of the hearth. It was here, in these small, deliberate choices, that medieval people found the comfort necessary to sleep through the harshest nights. The combination of bedding techniques, shared body heat, and thoughtful preparation transformed a simple stone house into a haven, a place where warmth was not a luxury, but a daily achieved art. The night deepened outside the medieval village, snow drifting silently over the fields and rooftops, blanketing the world in quiet silver. Inside the stone cottage, the fire had been banged, the bedding prepared, and the family was already drifting toward rest. Yet the warmth they enjoyed was not a matter of chance. It was the result of careful design, passed down through generations, honed by necessity and survival. Every stone, beam, and shutter played a role in keeping the cold at bay. Medieval peasant homes were not built for luxury, but they were ingeniously suited to endure the harshest winters. One of the first principles was small, compact rooms. Smaller spaces required less energy to heat and allowed the hearth's warmth to spread more efficiently. A single main room often served multiple purposes: cooking, eating, working, and sleeping. Its compactness helped trap heat, ensuring that even a modest fire could warm the space adequately. The thick stone walls were another essential feature. Stone, though cold to the touch, absorbed heat from the hearth during the day and released it slowly at night. This slow radiation created a subtle, steady warmth, reducing the chill that would otherwise seep through thinner walls. In some homes, mud or clay was applied to the stones, adding insulation and helping to seal tiny cracks where winter drafts might sneak through. The walls were practical, enduring, and surprisingly effective against frost. Low ceilings complemented this design. Heat naturally rises, and in a room with a low ceiling, the warm air remained near the living space rather than dissipating above. This created a cocoon of warmth where the family slept, worked, and rested. The combination of stone walls, low ceilings, and compact space formed a simple but brilliant thermal strategy that modern science would recognize as basic energy efficiency. In many villages, homes were constructed over or near animal stalls. Cows, goats, and sheep produced a surprising amount of warmth, which rose gently through the floorboards into the living space above. This added, subtle heat was invaluable during the coldest months. Even chickens in adjacent pens contributed, their small bodies creating pockets of warmth that helped keep the cottage cozy. The placement of animals was deliberate, turning livestock into living radiators. Windows and doors were also carefully considered. Most medieval cottages had only small, shuttered windows. Glass was rare and expensive, so openings were minimized to reduce drafts. Wooden shutters, often reinforced with cloth or straw, could be closed tightly at night, trapping heat inside. Doors were similarly reinforced, sometimes with hanging tapestries or thick cloths to prevent cold air from slipping through the gaps. Every barrier was part of the strategy to maintain warmth. The roofing materials played a subtle but important role. Thatched roofs, common in rural cottages, were excellent insulators. Layers of reeds or straw not only kept rain and snow out but also prevented heat from escaping upward. The thickness of the thatch created a buffer against the biting wind, while its natural fibers trapped pockets of warm air inside the house. Even the slightest shift in straw placement could affect the overall comfort of the cottage. Inside, families understood the importance of furniture placement. Heavy chests and benches were often positioned against walls, serving as additional barriers against drafts. Rugs, mats, and layers of straw were laid over floors to prevent cold from rising through packed earth. Hanging textiles, dried hides, and blankets could be draped over walls, doors, or windows to provide extra insulation. Each small adjustment made the space more hospitable during the long winter nights. Ventilation, however, could not be ignored entirely. Smoke from the hearth needed a way to escape, and stale air could make rooms unhealthy. Families balanced this by creating small, controlled openings in the roof or walls, ensuring the fire's warmth remained trapped while smoke and dampness could exit. This delicate equilibrium heat retention without suffocating the room was a product of experience, observation, and necessity. Lighting also contributed indirectly to warmth. Candles and lamps, though primarily for visibility, produced small amounts of heat. In a compact stone room, even these modest sources added to the overall warmth, especially when combined with a banked hearth and layered bedding. Every source of heat was treasured, no matter how faint. Some cottages had lofts or raised platforms for sleeping. These areas offered slightly more warmth than the ground floor, as heat from the hearth and the bodies below rose gently. Sleeping in these elevated spaces was a strategic choice, maximizing the natural movement of heat within the home. Even a small difference in temperature could be vital during bitter nights. All these design choices, the thick walls, low ceilings, compact rooms, strategic furniture, small windows, sturdy doors, thatched roofs, animal placement, and lofted sleeping space, whose worked in harmony. None were extravagant, but each reflected a profound understanding of the environment, human needs, and the relentless logic of winter. Medieval families were not just enduring cold. They were mastering it through thoughtful adaptation. As the night continued, the cottage seemed to breathe with life. The fire hummed softly, embers pulsing in rhythm with the family's slowed breaths. Straw and wool held heat beneath sleeping bodies, and even the walls seemed to cradle warmth back into the room. Outside, snow drifted silently over the village, but inside, the house stood as a testament to quiet intelligence, resourcefulness, and resilience. In this carefully arranged space, the family could rest safely. They slept with confidence, knowing the combination of architectural insight, simple ingenuity, and experience would see them through the night. Winter could rage outside, wind and frost pressing against every stone, yet the house remained a haven. It was more than shelter, it was a sanctuary. A home engineered by necessity, shaped by centuries of survival, and perfected through quiet, patient observation. And so, as embers glowed faintly in the hearth and the night wrapped its arms around the village, the family slept on. Every detail, the walls, the ceilings, the floors, the windows, the doors, the placement of furniture and animals worked together to keep them alive, comfortable, and warm. This was the wisdom of medieval house design, a subtle architecture of endurance, a rhythm of life synchronized with the seasons. Outside the stone cottages, the medieval village settled into winter's deep embrace. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling footsteps, and wind drifted silently across the thatched roofs. Yet even in the coldest months, life inside the village was quietly alive. For medieval peasants, survival depended not only on walls, fires, and bedding, but also on the rhythms of the community and the rituals that guided each evening toward rest and warmth. As night fell, cottages flickered with the gentle glow of hearths. Families completed the day's final tasks, mindful of both practical needs and age-old routines. In every home, the evening was a carefully choreographed series of actions, designed to ensure comfort and readiness for the cold hours ahead. Firewood was replenished, prepared for the night so that embers could be banked for long-lasting heat. Pots were emptied, cleaned, and set in safe corners to avoid moisture or frost. Animal stalls were checked, and livestock brought closer to shared warmth when possible. Within this framework, storytelling and shared time played a vital role. The hearth became the central stage, and the family gathered in its glow. Mothers and fathers recounted tales of ancestors, folk legends, and simple parables. These were not stories meant to frighten, but to instruct and comfort, connecting children to their heritage while gently preparing them for sleep. The cadence of words, the warm voice of a parent, and the soft crackle of the fire created an atmosphere of safety and calm. Evening prayers were common, serving both spiritual and practical purposes. A quiet recitation of blessings over the household, the fire, and the family offered reassurance in a world where winter's harshness could feel overwhelming. Peasants might cross themselves, light a small candle for protection, or whisper thanks for warmth and food. These rituals were subtle, yet they provided a sense of control and connection to something larger, anchoring the household in peace before sleep. Mending clothes and preparing tools were also important winter tasks. Fabric scraps were sewn into patches to extend a life of worn garments. Woolen socks were repaired, and leather boots oiled and set near the hearth too dry. Knives were sharpened, wooden bowls inspected, and small repairs made to ensure the household would function smoothly the next day. These tasks, though simple, were calming, meditative, and practical. They were acts of care that safeguarded the household through the long nights. Children, meanwhile, learned patience and comfort in subtle ways. Lullabies were sung softly as they nestled into the warm bedding, blankets tucked snugly around small bodies. Some children listened to the faint rustle of animals or the soft hum of adults tending chores, learning the rhythm of the village night. Their world was small, intimate, and carefully curated to blend safety, warmth, and gentle instruction. Even the community itself played a role. Though cottages were separated by snow-laden lanes, neighbors often communicated across yards with quiet calls, sharing news or advice about the winter ahead. Sometimes, simple exchanges of food or firewood occurred, reminding villagers that survival was a network of small kindnesses. The knowledge that others nearby were awake, tending to their own hearths, lent a quiet comfort to the night. It was an invisible web of care and reassurance, stretching across the sleeping village. Nighttime in winter was long, and rituals helped to structure it. As the fire dimmed, tasks were completed, and bodies and minds prepared for rest. A sense of rhythm prevailed. The simple repetition of gathering around the hearth, checking the fire, sharing warmth, telling stories, and praying created predictability. In a world without modern conveniences, predictability was a form of safety, a subtle lullaby for the body and soul alike. Children drifted into sleep gradually, often lulled by the interplay of light, warmth, and sound. The fire's glow softened, flickering shadows danced across stone walls, and the low murmur of adult voices receded into the rhythm of the household. Even the small animals contributed, their quiet movements blending into a lullaby of life that reinforced the stability of the home. In cottages with multiple families or shared spaces, communal rituals amplified warmth and security. People spoke softly, tended each other's fires, and offered small gestures of care, ensuring that every household member could rest without fear of cold or isolation. In villages where winter nights could be harsh and unpredictable, such rituals were essential. They created a collective resilience, a shared intelligence, born of experience and empathy. Through these nighttime routines, medieval peasants mastered not just the cold, but the passage of time itself. Each task, story, and prayer guided the household into sleep slowly, gently, as if the night itself were a careful teacher. The balance of practical chores, shared warmth, spiritual reflection, and storytelling created a holistic experience, one that addressed body, mind, and soul, preparing everyone to face the frozen world outside with renewed strength. By morning, the hearth remained the silent anchor, embers glowing softly even as family members settled into their bedding. Straw, wool, and furs held warmth, while the shared presence of loved ones provided another layer of comfort. The rituals of evening, the prayers, songs, storytelling, and work formed an invisible architecture of security, reinforcing the house's physical warmth with a deeper, emotional, and cultural warmth. It was this combination that allowed medieval families to sleep through winter nights with a sense of safety and peace. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and endless, brushing softly against thatched roofs. The village seemed suspended between earth and sky, wrapped in stillness, while inside each cottage, life and warmth persisted. The deliberate, gentle evening rituals ensured that even as darkness pressed against the walls, the household remained calm, alive, and prepared for sleep. Medieval winter nights were long, but in the rhythm of community and ritual, they were not lonely. They were contained, comforting, and meaningful. And so, as the night deepened further, cottages settled into quiet harmony. Fires glowed low, stories and prayers receded into memory. Children breathed softly beneath layered bedding, and families slept in a gentle embrace of both heat and habit. These small, deliberate acts, the collective wisdom of preparation, care, and ritual, kept life alive through the harshest winters. They were the secret warmth of medieval villages, unassuming yet enduring, a reminder that human ingenuity and shared love could conquer even the coldest nights. Outside, the village was silent, under a blanket of snow. The wind whispered across frozen fields, and the moon cast a soft glow over the thatched roofs, turning each one into a pale, rounded hill in the quiet night. Inside the stone cottages, life had slowed to its gentlest rhythm. The hearth glowed with fading embers. The bedding was arranged in layers of straw, wool, and furs, and families were settling into the deep, restorative quiet of winter sleep. This was the slow, dream-like heart of the medieval night, a time when the world seemed suspended between moments, and warmth, breath, and shadow merged into a gentle lullaby for those within. The household, once bustling with the day's work, now exhaled in unison. Footsteps were rare, whispers were hushed, and the fire's pulse became the metronome of the night. Breaths rose in soft clouds, curling and fading into the dim air. Children nestled between parents, bodies sharing warmth as naturally as the hearth shared heat. Even the animals in adjoining stalls contributed their quiet warmth, adding layers of comfort in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Every movement was measured, deliberate, part of the invisible rhythm of sleep. Here, in this suspended world, the household existed in a delicate balance between the warmth of life and the cold beyond the stone walls. The stone walls themselves seemed to breathe with the night, holding the residual heat from the day and slowly releasing it into the room. Shadows moved gently as the firelight dimmed, flickering across uneven surfaces, painting the walls with fleeting shapes. The low ceiling, the compact room, and the careful placement of furniture all worked together to trap warmth and create a sanctuary from the chill. The cottage became a cocoon, holding its inhabitants safely within. Outside, winter whispered, its presence whined rustling snow-laden branches, ice cracking faintly along the river, distant calls of a nocturnal animal. Yet these sounds were softened by the thick stone walls, muffled and muted. Inside, every small sound, the soft rustle of straw, the faint shift of a blanket, a quiet sigh from a child became amplified in significance, like punctuation in the poetry of the night. Each sound spoke of life persisting, of warmth maintained, of care exercised. The embers in the hearth pulsed gently, radiating a slow, even heat. Medieval families had learned to bank fires to last through the night, allowing them to smolder without consuming fuel too quickly. A glowing coal under ash could provide hours of subtle warmth, enough to prevent the chill from reaching the beds. Parents would occasionally glance at the hearth, ensuring it remained alive. But their movements were slow and careful, never disturbing the serene atmosphere. The fire itself seemed to share the calm, fading into the rhythm of sleep rather than dominating it. Children dreamed amidst the layering of straw, wool, and furs, often nestled close enough to their parents that every movement of breath became a gentle, shared rhythm. Their tiny bodies radiated warmth, complementing the heat from the hearth and the residual heat from the walls. In this carefully orchestrated environment, sleep was both deep and restorative. Medieval nights were long, and every measure of preparation ensured that life within the cottage could continue uninterrupted until dawn. In larger cottages or lofted spaces, warmth naturally pooled where bodies gathered. Sleeping arrangements were deliberate. Youngest children at the center, older siblings and parents forming a protective perimeter. Heated stones or warm bundles of straw extended as comfort, radiating gentle heat into the bed. Layers of wool and furs added insulation, trapping both human and ambient warmth. In this way, the night was made tolerable, even pleasant, despite the frost pressing against the windows and doors. Time seemed to slow further as the night progressed. Breaths softened into whispers, shadows lengthened, and the fire's pulse became almost imperceptible. Every surface, the stone walls, wooden beams, packed earth floor, and straw bedding retained subtle heat, a testimony to the medieval understanding of materials and their capacity to preserve life. Even the smallest details, the placement of a chest, the hanging of a tapestry, the careful stacking of firewood contributed to a larger, invisible network of warmth and comfort. The night itself became a living presence, gentle and slow. It encouraged introspection, rest, and reflection, while subtly teaching the rhythm of care, preparation, and resilience. Outside, the world lay quiet, white, and frozen. Inside, the cottage breathed slowly, holding warmth and life in a delicate equilibrium. Every sigh, every movement, every pulse of heat from the hearth, bedding, or human body reinforced the safety and calm of the household. In this dreamlike state, the household was united not only by warmth, but by the intangible rhythms of life. Storytelling, prayers, songs, and shared attention to routine had guided the family to this moment. Now, as eyes closed and minds wandered into sleep, the cottage itself became part of the lullaby. The stone walls, embers, straw, furs, and wool, all contributing to a night carefully orchestrated for comfort. Outside, the wind might have howled, snowflakes drifting endlessly across frozen fields. Yet inside, life endured in gentle harmony. Every element of the medieval home, the hearth, the bedding, the architectural choices, the community rituals was in quiet concert to sustain warmth and provide comfort. The night was long, but it was navigated gracefully through centuries of learned wisdom, creating an environment where rest was not just possible, but deeply restorative. And so, the night moved forward, slow and dreamlike. Every breath, every sigh, every pulse of warmth became a part of the household's rhythm. Outside, winter pressed, but inside, life was calm, soft, and enduring. Medieval people did not merely survive the night, they orchestrated it and softened it, using ingenuity, care, and subtle rituals to transform cold and darkness into a cocoon of warmth and peace. As the medieval night deepened, the cottage seemed to hold its breath, yet the warmth inside was steady, constant, and deliberate. Beneath the simple routines and daily habits lay a profound wisdom, a quiet intelligence that allowed families to endure the harshest winters. These were the hidden techniques of medieval life. Subtle, practical, and elegant. Designed not for luxury, but for survival, comfort, and gentle resilience. At the heart of this wisdom was heat management. Families understood that every bit of warmth mattered, whether from the hearth, the walls, the bedding, or their own body. Fires were carefully banked, embers preserved beneath ash for slow, steady release of heat. Heated stones, wrapped in cloth or buried under straw, radiated warmth long after the flames had faded. Even the placement of beds and bedding was deliberate, maximizing heat retention and ensuring the coldest corners were avoided. Each element of the home was a part of a carefully orchestrated system, working together to preserve life through the night. Shared living spaces were another essential technique. Families slept close together, bodies pressed near one another to conserve heat, and animals were often accommodated indoors or beneath lofted floors, their natural warmth adding to the household's comfort. This was not merely practical, it was a quiet philosophy of human cooperation, a recognition that survival was best achieved through connection, proximity, and care. Each household member contributed to the shared warmth, creating a network of heat that flowed almost imperceptibly through the room. Preparation for winter was itself an art form. Tom families collected firewood with care, selecting dry logs that would burn evenly and last through long nights. Herbs were gathered and hung to dry, not only for culinary or medicinal use, but also to provide subtle insulation and repel pests. Animal fat, stored for lamps or cooking, could also be used as a gentle source of warmth when needed. Every action reflected foresight and experience, an understanding of the subtle interplay between resources and survival. Medieval people also mastered layering and insulation in ways that modern life often forgets. Straw mattresses were fluffed and rotated to maintain loft. Furs and wool blankets were layered strategically to trap heat. Clothing was worn to bed for additional insulation. These techniques, tout simple, were the result of centuries of observation. Every element, from bedding to clothing to furniture placement, was chosen with care to create an optimal balance between warmth and comfort. The architecture of the home itself was a form of wisdom. Thick stone walls, low ceilings, small windows, and compact rooms were not arbitrary. They were the products of accumulated knowledge about heat retention and the movement of air. Thatched roofs and insulated floors provided additional protection, while the positioning of furniture, beds, and animals enhanced natural heat flow. Even the use of tapestries, rugs, and wall hangings reflected an understanding of insulation, sound absorption, and subtle comfort. The medieval home was a living system, and its design reflected a quiet, enduring intelligence. There was also temporal wisdom, the understanding of how to pace activity and rest. Daily routines were aligned with the natural rhythms of daylight and darkness. Evening chores were completed with care, fires banked, bedding prepared, and animals settled before the household slowed into sleep. Children were lulled gradually with stories, songs, or quiet tasks, creating a smooth transition from wakefulness to rest. This temporal order ensured that warmth was maintained efficiently, and that night was endured with minimal stress. The emotional and social aspects of these techniques were equally important. Stories told around the hearth were more than entertainment. They reinforced shared knowledge, history, and values. Prayers and small rituals offered reassurance, creating a sense of safety beyond the physical. The combined effect of warmth, routine, and emotional care provided both comfort and psychological stability, allowing people to rest fully and prepare for the long hours of winter with calm minds. Even subtle micro-adjustments were part of the hidden wisdom. A piece of cloth hung over a doorway, a bundle of straw tucked into a corner, a small stone moved slightly closer to the bed. Each minor adjustment had a measurable effect on comfort. Medieval families observed, experimented, and remembered. Over time, these small innovations accumulated into a profound understanding of the environment and how best to navigate it. It was an intelligence born of necessity, observation, and patience. The result of all these techniques was a remarkable endurance. Families slept through nights that modern imaginations might consider unbearable, rising each morning with warmth retained, energy preserved, and spirits steadied. There was no sudden miracle. It was the quiet culmination of preparation, shared knowledge, and attentive living. The medieval night, though long and cold, was softened through understanding, making sleep not only possible, but restorative. In every stoned cottage, these hidden techniques formed an invisible architecture of life. Heat was managed, space was optimized, routines were maintained, and care was shared. It was a philosophy that combined practicality with subtle artistry, and it left no aspect of the household unattended. Every ember, every layer of straw, every piece of wool, every child tucked close, every animal's body heat was a deliberate choice, contributing to a living system designed to endure winter's harshness. And as the night deepened still further, the cottage breathed with gentle harmony. Embers glowed faintly, shadows flickered softly against stone walls, and the family rested securely in the careful orchestration of their home. Outside, winter's quiet persisted, snow falling in soft layers, wind drifting across frozen fields. But inside, the hidden wisdom of centuries ensured life continued in warmth, calm, and gentle continuity. These were not just survival strategies, they were a meditation on resilience, ingenuity, and care. The medieval household, through thoughtful preparation and shared effort, transformed the coldest nights into periods of safety and rest. It was a quiet intelligence, a hidden philosophy of life, manifesting in heat, routine, and ritual. And as the night moved toward its final hours, this wisdom ensured that the household could face the dawn, prepared, restored, and calm. The night had softened into the faintest hints of morning. Through cracks in the shutters and around the edges of doors, pale light began to creep, delicate and quiet, touching the surfaces of the stone cottage. Outside, the snow glimmered faintly, frost sparkling like tiny stars along the edges of window panes and rooftops. The village remained still, the world suspended between sleep and awakening, wrapped in a calm hush that only early winter mornings can hold. Inside the cottage, the family stirred gently. A mother lifted a blanket, careful not to rouse a sleeping child. A father stretched, feeling the warmth radiating from the embers still glowing softly in the hearth. The night had passed slowly, dreamlike, measured by the rhythm of breaths, the pulse of the fire, and the subtle shifts of body heat beneath layers of straw, wool, and furs. Now, in this quiet moment, dawn offered its gentle light as a reward for the household's patience, care, and resilience. The air, crisp and faintly scented with smoke and pine, carried the first promise of a new day. Tiny ice crystals clung to the thatched roofs, reflecting the soft morning glow. Outside, the wind moved more gently, as if respecting the calm that had been maintained all night. Even the animals, previously nestled close for warmth, beg and toastir, contributing their small, comforting sounds to the tranquil symphony of morning. The hearth, though diminished from its nocturnal peak, remained the heart of the home. Its warmth lingered, a slow gift of the night's embers, ready to be rekindled for the day ahead. Families tended to it with practiced hands, blowing softly to revive glowing coals, and arranging new firewood to maintain a steady, gentle flame. The ritual was subtle yet essential, ensuring that heat and comfort flowed seamlessly from night to day. Children awoke gradually, eyes blinking into the faint morning light. Warmth still pooled beneath their layered bedding. Their small bodies had rested well, insulated by centuries of accumulated wisdom. Straw mattresses, furs, wool blankets, heated stones, and the quiet, shared warmth of family. Each child stretched, yawned, and turned slightly, greeted by the soft murmur of parents, the faint crackle of the hearth, and the gentle stirrings of animals nearby. The adults moved slowly, carefully maintaining the calm atmosphere. Water was brought near the fire to warm. Small tasks completed quietly, preserving the serenity that had been nurtured through the long night. Even the simplest actions, adjusting blankets, removing the last layers of straw, or smoothing a child's hair, were deliberate, contributing to the continuity of comfort. There was no rush, no sudden clamor, only the measured unfolding of morning. As the village beyond the stone walls began to awaken, faint sounds reached the cottage. A rooster crowing, distant footsteps, perhaps the soft creak of a neighboring door. Yet inside, warmth remained steady, grounded in both the physical design of the home and the invisible architecture of care that had guided the night. The family's preparation, routines, and shared wisdom had carried them through winter's harshness, leaving them ready to greet the day with strength and calm. The light slowly deepened, stretching across the packed earth floor and stone walls, illuminating the textures and details often unnoticed during the night. Smoke drifted lazily upward from the renewed hearth, curling and dispersing toward the ceiling. The cottage itself seemed to exhale, moving from night to day with a gentle rhythm that had always marked life in a medieval home. Each element of fire, the walls, the bedding, the animals participated in this subtle transformation, turning survival into comfort, endurance into calm. In these moments, the wisdom of the medieval household was most evident. Every detail, from thick stone walls to layered bedding, from shared warmth to evening rituals, had contributed to the peaceful passing of the night. The techniques, both practical and subtle, allowed life to continue undisturbed despite the cold outside. The knowledge of how to manage warmth, maintain the hearth, prepare bedding, and share space was not just survival, it was an art passed down from parent to child, generation to generation. As the day fully arrived, the family prepared to begin their morning routines. The hearth's glow promised breakfast, the layering of clothing readied for work or chores, and the animals stirred in anticipation of feeding and care. Yet even in movement and activity, the calm of the night lingered. It had not been hurried. It had been deliberate, immersive, and restorative. The endurance and quiet intelligence of the medieval household echoed through each careful action, and as the family stepped outside, they were greeted by frost glinting on every branch, snow dusting every rooftop, and sunlight brushing the edges of the village in a soft, golden halo. The cold remained outside, formidable and real, yet inside the knowledge and practice of centuries had created a sanctuary. The cottage had protected, nurtured, and preserved life through the night. It was more than stone, and what it was a living testament to human ingenuity, care, and resilience. Finally, the narration slows, giving space for reflection. The medieval night, with all its techniques, rituals, and wisdom, was a gentle reminder that survival need not be harsh, that warmth can be cultivated with knowledge, care, and attention. Life, even in the coldest and longest winters, was full of subtle triumphs, small comforts, and quiet intelligence. As the family moved through morning light, the viewer is invited to carry the same calm, deliberate awareness into their own rest. And now, as the story draws to a close, the soft, relaxing music begins. Let the gentle notes carry you further into calm, inviting sleep. Think of glowing embers, layered bedding, quiet hearths, and the subtle warmth that protected a medieval family through the night. Drift gently with the rhythm of the house, the night, and the enduring wisdom that has carried generations through winter's quiet embrace. Thank you for joining this journey into the warmth, ingenuity, and calm of medieval nights. May your own rest be as gentle and restorative as the households of long ago. And now, allow the music to guide you deeper into sleep as the story ends and quiet fills the room. And so, our journey through the quiet, cold nights of the medieval world comes to a close. We have seen how families, with simple tools, careful preparation, and shared warmth, transformed stone cottages into sanctuaries against winter's chill. From the flickering hearth to layers of straw and wool, from bedtime rituals to the hidden wisdom of long nights, we have glimpsed the ingenuity, patience, and resilience of medieval life. Now, as the story ends, let the soft, relaxing music begin, carrying you further into calm and serenity. Imagine the gentle warmth of embers, the quiet hush of a stone cottage, and the peaceful rhythm of winter nights long ago. Thank you for joining this journey. May the subtle wisdom and quiet endurance of the past guide you into a night of deep rest, comfort, and gentle dreams.